Welcome to 3 Questions, where I ask my guests to choose 3 questions out of 5, and then we talk about stuff. Today, I am joined by Vivian Chen, who I have not, I think we've met in person. I feel like we've encountered each other a bunch of times, right? But we've never really
Yeah,
properly spent time together.
that's
Most
right.
of what I know about you is from social media, and you're really, like, one of the things is I've been using this podcast a little bit to like both connect to people that I know and love and have worked with and want to connect with, but I've also just been using it as an opportunity to just talk to people that I've admired from afar. And you're a little bit in that camp where I find your presence on social media so just fantastic and strong and grounded, thoughtful. That's not your bio exactly, but it's sort of my connection with you is just being like, you're just someone that I've always respected.
That is so
In
nice.
addition, you've been a teacher, a coach, a consultant, all in California?
All in California. All in California. I'm a born and raised and never going to leave California, California girl.
Your expression looks resigned to that.
No. Actually, I think
It's a
it's
pretty
more.
good place to find yourself in, I think, all told. It's not the worst.
No, definitely not. I think it's more, maybe my expression is more expressing how other people see California.
Yes. I love California. I always feel like it would do me well to live in California for a couple years. Like, I'd be healthier at the end of that experience, right? I'm so New Englandy, like, just angry sort of randomly all the time. I think it would be nice.
Come to the sunshine. Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so you have chosen, I actually forgot what questions you chose. 2, 3, 5, is that right?
Yeah.
Did I get it right?
2, 3, and 5.
Okay, so let's dive in. So question number 2, which is our question number 1, is if you were given 3 wishes to use on the American education system, what would you wish for?
So I was like, I should think about it a little bit. I don't want to be like writing an essay, but I just want to at least have some things in mind.
Yeah.
And of course, like immediately the first thing was about standardized testing. But then yesterday's, gajillionth shooting happened. And I was, because I originally thought one of my first wishes was to get rid of standardized testing because I think all my other wishes would come true if that were to happen. But then I was like, no. My wish is that we actually had a country that loved children.
Yeah.
Like, then all my wishes could come true. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, I do.
Because if we really love children, we wouldn't subject them to standardized testing either.
And love as an action word, right? That sort of cheesy cliche that I love, especially as someone in a long-term partnership, right? That love is a verb. There are actions that go along with it. Because I think that in America, we have this idea and this feeling that we love children.
A rhetoric.
Kids. I mean, rhetoric that we love children. And so I think it gets confusing, but it's like, how are we actively loving the children under our care?
Exactly.
What does that look like for you? What kind of actions? I mean, one, standardized testing. We would absolutely look at standardized testing and would be like, this is not a loving act for
It's
anybody.
not a loving act. I think we would do something about, I don't mean to get, away from necessary literacy or whatnot, but we would have some kind of gun.
Of course we would.
Reform, because we would say, oh, wait, this is the number one killer of children. Like, let's do something about this. Right. I think we would not argue about whether or not we feed kids. Right? Why is that even
pay for it, or be mad at them for not being able to pay for some food in the morning?
Yes. I mean, it's so gross. Like, how can we say that we love children and then say, well, you're going to eat this apple and some crackers on the side because you didn't pay your whatever, right?
And I could even get down with it if there was something consistent about that message. But we're giving plenty of tax breaks and money to rich guys. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, you know what I mean? Like, if we had a society where like, this is the rule is you only get what you earn. That is it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I don't care who you are, where you come from. Do you know what I mean? You have to earn what you get. Then you could be like, okay, I don't agree, but at least it's fair. But that's not the scenario. A kid can't have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich for free.
Right.
but
Right.
XYZ in charge of XYZ corporation can get plenty of things for free.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yep, I feel that.
So
I love that. Okay, so number one is that we would love children.
we would love children. And then the ancillary, is that the right word? I don't know.
Yeah,
I just like to use
so.
vocabulary. I don't know. Is the getting rid of standardized tests, because I do feel like the thing that drives all the other, like, oh, I was going to say,
yes. I knew I was going to get you to curse on this podcast, Vivian. Fantastic. That's what I'm looking for. Inappropriate behavior. We need more controversy on this podcast. We need people to tune in.
The funny thing is, I curse like a sailor, and growing up, I had a very sort of strict upbringing, and my dad actually got mad at me for saying the letters BS. So right now to say here,
this is rebellious. By contrast, my father, the first time I ever used the F word in front of him, it was a joke. And we were driving, and he looked at me, and I said it, and I was like, oh, what's going to happen? Do you know what I mean? Like, I just said the F word in front of my dad. And he looked at me, and he was like, you're a funny kid. And I was like, yes.
That is the best compliment ever.
It was the best. It explains a lot about my psychology, probably. Okay, so do you have other wishes, or are you doing, because I'm down with this. Is it like the umbrella wish is loving children, and then there's some subsets underneath that, or do you have another wish?
I think if I could have one more, it's a tie. That's my loophole. It's a tie.
You can do all of it. I'm not an actual wish giver, so you can have 20 wishes if you really want.
I could wish for more wishes. I think, this is going to sound a little bit funny, but I wish we could just abolish all things that kind of force involuntary competition for kids, like school awards, behavior charts, grading, like all of those things, right? I think really push kids into this space where they didn't ask for it. Like, you have to go to school, and hopefully our goal is for them to learn, but yet we impose all of this competition that I don't know that I want, right?
Right. Or is that the right mindset to be in around learning, right? And getting better at things.
Yeah. And I think it's back to loving children, because I think one of the things that has stood out to me this has been on my list for a long time, but just recently a kindergarten teacher was sharing, they were doing their school awards assembly, and she was looking out into the audience as she was giving out the awards at one of her kids, who I think Carla Shalaby would be in her book, in the Troublemakers book, and just hoping that she wasn't going to cry because she wasn't going to get an award. And I said, what are we doing to these kindergarten kids that we're sitting them in this long ass assembly just so that they might, feel shattered? Anyway, that's out. Get rid of
it. Well, and it's so tied to things that I think then become even more, you talked about grading, which obviously is, so problematic and so here, you know what I mean? Like, we have to grapple with it. We have to contend with it. We can't just pretend it's not there, but you can just really see. And I think it's one of those things where it's hard for us as Americans, or it's hard for me as an American growing up here, bathing in this culture, right? To really understand how much that competitive mindset gets in the way sometimes. It can be a motivator for some kids, but for a lot of kids, right, it just becomes I guess I can't do it.
Yeah. Well, then it's also motivating them to do what? It's not necessarily motivating them to learn. Right?
Yeah.
It's motivating them to achieve, do.
Yeah. There's so much of that, right? There's so much of that, of how do we preserve in schools, or can we honor the things in schools that there's someone online. I'm so scattered today. I'm going to blame menopause, Vivian, is what I'm going to blame for every mistake I make.
Everything. Yeah.
It's all that. But I was reading, so there's someone online, gosh, I think his name is Monty Siri or something on Twitter, where he every day posts, what is the purpose of education? And he just posts that question every single day. And every single time I see it, right, it's just another reminder of like, right, is the purpose of education to get the kids to be able to achieve in a capitalist society? Is that the main purpose? It's not really why I got into it. But I think we
Right.
find ourselves, right? It's kind of how we find ourselves instead of the main purpose being really learning things or reading or exploring our humanity or being curious or forming community or all these other things that can't be
Exactly.
graded,
Exactly.
can't really be graded in that same way.
We were talking in the book club and you were saying about when people bring up grading, you're like, oh, can we just like not talk
Oh, I
about
don't
that?
have time for that now. We gotta.
There. I don't want to talk about grading. I don't want to talk about rubrics. Like, I will, but I don't
I
want to.
will.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm so respectful of people like I was just talking to Tyler Rablin, who does a lot with assessment, and Alfie Cohn and Sarah Zerwin, who are really like tackling these questions of like, because my thing in most classroom teachers, I think response is everyone dislikes grading. Everyone understands that it's a system that's not working for the goals that we actually have for our kids. Very few people can envision actual practical doable way to live differently. And so the
Yeah.
educators who don't avoid the question like I do or reserve it for a short period of time where I'll say what I know, you know what I mean, here's what I'm thinking, whatever.
Yeah.
Boy, I respect educators because that's a tough road.
It really is. Yeah, it's funny. I woke up at like 5 in the morning, maybe 4:30 in the morning, so that I could join a webinar with Alfie Cohn during the pandemic. He was like, I don't know, in some like Dubai. I don't know where he was. But and it was all about grading. And I really loved what he said. He's like, you have to have like a double track agenda where you are one agenda is to dismantle the system and disrupt it. And the other is to like kind of play the game the best you can. Right.
That's right. That's right.
With the least amount of harm.
Wow, that explains my entire way of living, Vivian, I think.
Yeah, that's
Half
it.
of me is like, this is how do we burn this down? And then half of me is like, no, it's fine. We're gonna make it work. It's gonna be great.
We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. Yeah.
I love that. All right, our second question. So we were thinking about your favorite word in education that we haven't ruined.
I think that student-centered and or agency haven't been ruined in the sense that you can't really take away the meaning of those,
Yeah.
and they haven't been put through some kind of protocol. Like,
I love this. So what does that mean to you? Let's talk about how you see that word student centered, because I think what is not ruined is that I think that people have an idea of what that word means. Do you know what I mean? And like kids should do whatever they want. Constant choice all the time. You know what I mean? Like that it's like, oh, the kids are in charge in some way, which isn't always, it's not what that means to me, for example. I'm sure it's not what that means to you as well. What is student centered? How does that look like?
I think for me it's about, students having some choice, having some power, right? In places where that allows itself. And also like right now, this whole thing with over here in California, we have, I'm sure actually it's across the country, there's a big push for like this knowledge building
Yes.
ELA curriculum, right?
Yep.
But if it's student centered, we would think about, well, what's the kind of knowledge that kids are interested in, and how can we tap into what their interests are to build that knowledge versus just out of nowhere saying, you know what would be great for you
Yep.
is
You
this.
should learn about this. Yeah,
So
I
I
also
think,
think that like that idea of like starting from kids' interests and having choice around that. And I think the other thing with student centered that always resonates with me is the idea of like starting where they are, right? So
mm-hmm,
if you talk about knowledge building, that's one place. But when you think about like skills, which is sort of my wheelhouse, right?
yeah,
Like a lot of times we get into this zone of being like where kids should be by this age,
mm-hmm,
what they should be able to do by this age, and realizing that a real student-centered curriculum is going to have the flexibility and room to say, yes, we have goal marks, yes, we have progress we want to make or whatever, but it's going to start with what we see the kids are able to do,
right.
right,
And
and what
instead of
they need to
dragging
learn.
them, yeah,
Yeah, so being like, well, you're over here, but we're gonna start here because you're in 8th grade. Do you know what I mean? And just being like, well,
exactly.
we're just gonna make everything, I even think just on the classroom teacher experience, like my experience in the classroom, is it just makes it harder for me as a teacher.
Yes.
My job becomes so difficult when I'm trying to teach kids in a way that they're not ready for or that they're already beyond.
Absolutely. I feel like that's the thing, right? We're always fighting with the kids. Why are we fighting with them? Like,
Why are we
why are we
fighting with them?
why are we fighting with them?
Can we stop fighting with the kids?
Yes, let's stop fighting with the kids. And so
Let's,
many of the things that like I dealt with it myself as a teacher, or that like the teachers I work with now, all of their woes and troubles, I feel like
yep,
stem from a lot of that. Like we're just dragging
yep,
them kicking and screaming and fighting with them instead of honoring where they are and moving them
that's right.
forward from that point. Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so least favorite. I bet you have about 50 million least favorite words because we've
Yeah.
ruined a
So
lot
I
of
have
them.
50 million. So I was like, let me think of what's the one that's going to encapsulate it
I
all.
think we're doing great so
Okay, it's either got to be data driven or
far.
urgency.
Yeah,
Okay, like
yeah,
one of those two got to be the one that just get
yeah.
the
You can
one
do both.
going.
You can do both. There's no
Yeah.
rules here. There's no rules here in Three Questions podcast. Okay, so data driven.
Data
That's right.
driven.
I mean,
Data
I'm
driven.
there. Hmm.
And it's not that I don't think data is important. Data is important, but it's always this data driven is like how many kids are in the green, blue, yellow, red versus what's going on with this
What do you
kid.
know
What
about them?
yeah,
Yeah.
great,
Yeah, yeah.
right? It's just like no, now we have three kids and whatnot. Um, And I think data driven also leads to urgency and Have you listened or read the Street Data book or
Yeah,
podcast?
it's an incredible book.
It's
Incredible
so
book.
good.
I haven't
It's so
listened. Oh, there's a
good.
podcast.
There's a podcast. Oh my gosh,
Who
yeah. And I was like,
who wrote that again?
that is a good Shane
Yeah,
Saphir, and who is the other author? There's two
I'm gonna look
authors.
it up just so we
Shane
can
Saphir
quote
sticks out to me because of social media. I see her name pop up.
them.
But
Jamila
yeah,
W.
oh yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, they have some great guests. Gloria Ladson Billings was on like
Incredible.
recently. She is the goat. Um, actually, one of their guests, I really liked what he said. He said we need to marginalize standardized testing.
Oh,
Anyway, right? I was
that's
like,
great.
yeah, marginalize
Yeah,
standardized testing.
marginalize that.
But when they're talking about urgency, I was like, this makes so much sense. Is because we're doing urgency. I think that's when we run around with our heads cut off, like and then we do stuff that doesn't make sense.
Especially if we're urgent about like the data, right? Because the data is going
Yes.
to, by definition, get us running around like a chicken with our heads cut off because there's so
Yes.
much of it. And it's actually not directly correlated to necessarily what kids can actually do, right? Think about
Yes.
standardized testing and we're like, okay, that's fine. The kid got question 3 wrong. That's data. And so you want to be able to look at that and say, they need help drawing conclusions because they got question 3 wrong. So obviously they need help with that skill. But then you look at the test and it's actually that the text was too hard or about a topic they never heard of, or the question was worded in a way that was so obfuscating that you're like, well, that was just a riddle that you gave the kid that they
Right.
couldn't
Right.
solve the riddle. You know what I mean? Like it's not that they couldn't do the
Yeah.
skill. And so you talk about that because we're urgent then about something that's not true, something that's
Right.
not student centered, something that's not based in what this child needs to get better. And so now we're piling instruction urgently
Yes.
in a non-student centered way, top down. I'm telling you, you need help drawing conclusions. So now you're going to be in a small group where we draw conclusions for weeks and weeks and weeks, even though that's not even what is
Yes.
something else that the data didn't show because it was based in standardized tests, right? It's all
Exactly.
part of it. It's all part of it.
All of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then just like you said, just throwing instruction, but not also then having a critical lens on what is our instruction that we're doing right now. Like, what are these? Why am I making the kids sit on the computer for X amount of minutes or whatever it is?
Yep.
But
What's your
kind of
favorite way? Oh yeah, go ahead.
no, I just wanted to say, like you when you were saying that, it reminded me, like I don't know, whatever in the SBAC craft is one of the strands,
Yeah.
like the kids get tested on, like however that gets tested.
Yeah.
Also, I don't think I would pass the seventh grade version, but anyway, in this district I was at, the top leaders were like, all your lessons have to include craft. Okay, well, what does that mean? Like,
what does that
how does it
mean?
make sense? But that is working with urgency. That's
Urgency, because
urgency
of
at
the
play.
data. Because of
The
the data.
data,
The data tells
data
us we have to be urgent
driving.
about crap.
Yes. And I'm like, what? Okay.
What is your
Anyway.
favorite what is your favorite sort of either source of data or kind of data that you get from kids? Because data driven, right? Yep, I don't like it, but like you said, very few educators disagree that we need information on
Yeah.
what kids need to inform our instruction, right? There's very few. When we push back against standardized tests, we're not saying we don't want information. So how do you
Yeah.
what's your favorite form of information that you get?
I mean, really, my favorite is talking with kids, talking about their reading, talking about their writing with them. Like, it
Yeah,
is. It's I can't think of anything better.
there's
Like,
nothing. There's
you
nothing.
know, there's nothing better.
There's
Nothing better.
nothing. Especially when
Um,
I will put the caveat, there's nothing better. I want to say that, but then I'm like, okay, I want to empathize with the teachers I know, the teachers I work with, who find that work incredibly intimidating, right? Because there's nothing better when you know what you're listening for, when you know what you're looking for, right? When you know the kinds of questions to ask that move beyond like what's happening in the book or tell me about your story that you're writing or something like that, right? But when you have
yeah.
those conditions, you get so much information from a 5-10 minute conversation with a kid,
Yeah.
and you build a relationship with them, right? You're doing both. You're like connecting to them
Yeah.
and finding out what they need to learn.
Well, I was just going to say, I think even when, I mean, I remember those days when I would sit and be like, so how's your reading going? And then a kid would say something to me and I'd be like, great. Let me just walk away. I don't know.
Okay,
And
book's
that's
good. Great. I'm glad the book's good. I gotta go.
cool. Um, but that said, yeah, I get the intimidation piece. It's like, well, I don't know what to say or do next. But also, the last part of what you were saying is that relationship building, I think, just makes it great anyway. It's still great,
Anyway,
even if I don't know what to say. Is that
that's
you
it.
know that I care about what you're doing and I really want to listen to you and I'm going to find out something about you, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, it's funny because we talk so much about relationship building in education, like too much. It's another word we've sort of ruined, right? Like there's nothing wrong with relationship building. That is everything. But now people say it and I'm like, oh, God, relationships, right?
Everything. Ugh.
But there are practices we can do in the classroom that do that work really, really well, right?
Yeah,
Like one
yeah.
conferences. I love it. Okay. Last question. You said 5. Excellent.
Mm.
Why do you think it matters still to teach students to read independently and powerfully? And the caveat I keep putting on this question is I really am intending this question to mean specifically kind of eyes on print reading. Like, and it's not
Mhm.
to say
Yeah,
like I love audiobooks, my kid loves audiobooks. I am so thrilled that they exist and they should, and I want to honor that and lean into it. And I keep seeing in schools that sitting down and putting your eyes on a text is decreasing. And I wonder, like, I believe in that still, right? I believe that it has value, but I
yeah.
wonder sometimes why? Am I wrong? Am I fighting for something that's old? Like, what's the point of it?
The answer is this because we're this old. Just
The
kidding.
answer is menopause.
No.
If you have math classes at night, you still think reading is important.
You must have been born. No, but that's fun. I'm glad you said that and added that because I do think we can also talk about reading all kinds of text, not just print on the page or print on the screen. But the thing is, there is still so much print, and for me, there's a few things. One is there is so much print out there that's misinformation or that you can misinterpret, right? If you're not reading with a critical eye that's out there. But also, I don't know, and maybe this is again goes back to being old, is I feel like we've lost our ability to just focus on anything. And eyes on print is one of the ways that we can like build that muscle, right?
And it's a great way to build that muscle, right? Because it's like if you give kids choice, I mean, if you're not making them read one book for 8 weeks and instead you're like feeding them a diet of books that they want to read sometimes, then
Yeah.
pretty fun-ish in the context of other ways you could learn how to focus. It's a pretty
Yeah.
fun way to help kids learn how to focus.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think about being a kid. Sometimes in the summer, I would sit for so long that my butt would fall asleep. Like,
Yes.
because I was just in a book, just, I got to read the next page. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of people, I think, experience this. Like during the pandemic, I was like, great, I'm home. I'm going to read all the time. And then I read nothing.
Nothing.
Like,
I didn't read anything. I started TikTok, and that's what I did during the pandemic. It's rotted
me
my
too.
brain out. It's awful.
Me too. It's completely rotted my brain. But I'm back now. I'm giving myself, like, okay, depending on how much time I have, it
Yeah.
could just be like 10 minutes on the timer.
Yep. Yep.
And you can't
That's what I'm
look at
gonna do.
Instagram. You just eyes on print. Eyes on
Eyes
print.
on eyes on print.
Eyes on,
It's funny because my
yeah.
kids now have independent reading at home for homework. They're supposed to read at night. It's been
Yeah.
such a gift to our family because in the pandemic, I think all of us, our reading life went down. My listening went up. I was listening to podcasts. It's not that I wasn't reading texts or absorbing texts, but
Yeah.
that sitting and focusing with my eyes and my brain and not multitasking, that really withered on the vine. And the independent reading homework that the kids have been doing has been amazing because we all just get in one bed and we just read together. And I'm
Yeah.
realizing that right now my kids are better than I am at it in terms of just that idea of like, I can sit here for a while and read. Like I'm constantly
Right.
trying to reach for my phone as I'm reading with my children. I run PD on independent reading and stamina, and I've got 20 minutes. I'm like, oh, I wonder what's happening on the internet right now, And I could be like, Kate,
I feel
focus,
that so hard.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my
So one
gosh.
thing reading eyes on print is good for is focus. Anything else?
Yeah. I also think, especially for reading literature, just the idea of having empathy,
Mm,
like understanding other human experiences, I
yeah,
feel like is lost
yeah.
when you don't get to have, like when you were saying 8 weeks in one book. Yeah, that's great. But if I'm not having more,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a bigger diet of books,
Yep. Then you get
it's
that
limiting.
one perspective, that one story, that one character, that one you know what I mean? It's like it gives you blinders a little bit if you're in one book for a marking period. You don't get to read other stuff. I feel
Right.
that. I
Yeah.
feel that.
So I'm really curious how this is going to play out with this latest swing of the pendulum here, and focusing on. I mean, I'm not against
Yeah.
knowledge building, but why can't we do that in science and social studies? I don't know.
Well, and I mean, I
Let's.
think it's that same yeah, well, and I think it's that same question of, like, the pendulum, right? Because, of course knowledge is important. Of course, like, what yes, and
Yes.
there are probably critiques to be made, do you know what I mean, in terms of my balance in those things. Like, you could look at the way that I tend to approach teaching, and you could say, "You don't have enough knowledge building in your curriculum," and I think that might be a fair critique. But that's never the conversation. The
No.
conversation is skills bad, knowledge good,
Yeah. Wait, what?
right? And then it's knowledge bad, skills good. And you're just like, oh, every classroom teacher in America knows that it's both. Every
Right.
classroom teacher in America knows that it's a
Right.
balance. And very few people are teaching them how to balance them and figure out what do your students need right now, to your point of student-centered teaching, right? Like, how do I know how, as a teacher, to teach both knowledge building and skill development. Now I need to put those two things in place in concert in a way that feeds the kids that I serve. Every classroom
Right.
teacher knows that that's the truth, but they don't get it from the training and the professional development and right. They get one or the other. It's why I wrote a novel approach, right? Was that I was like seeing the whole class novel versus independent reading being this polarized thing when every teacher with common sense that I talked to was like, you need both of those forms to build readers.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. But also to that, I think it's interesting because even though, like right now, it's, de rigueur to talk about knowledge building, like
Mm.
the skills, I don't feel like we're really, like everybody didn't have a handle on how to teach skills either. So, like, yeah, I know I need to teach skills, but I don't know how to teach skills, right?
Well, we talked about this in the book club, right? That like one of the reasons why I wrote The Heart of Fiction was that, I've devoted my career to sort of skills and independence and student agency and choice and all this stuff. And it just was interesting to me that at a certain point, it felt like what we had done is actually complicate the idea of how do you teach sort of big skills like inferring characterization or interpreting themes or analyzing craft, right? That we'd actually made it so hard and
Yeah,
complex that it's not working. Do you know what I
right.
mean? Like the story I tell all the time is like being in classrooms, high school, middle school, whatever. And, if you ask kids, generally speaking, to say, tell me about the character in the books you're reading, generally speaking, the kids will say something like, she's sad.
Right.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's like, okay, so after years and years of teaching around characterization, what it takes to read a character in
Right.
11th grade, your go-to, right? Your default is she's sad. That's not a problem with the kid. I mean, might be, but it's not a problem with the kid, right? It's a problem with like, we're not getting the tire on the tread. There's something that's not
Right.
sort of working. And like,
Right.
we need to be able to do that well, just like we need to be able to teach knowledge building well, which I don't
Yeah.
know how to do very well, right? I would need to learn that, and hopefully I'll be able to learn it in a way that I can actually execute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That goes back to one of my wishes. Like, I think you and Maggie's like motto of people over programs, that's it. Like, how about the development of people? Right? Like, I
People.
don't mean development like you're in a deficit, but like an investment, right?
Investment. Well, in
An investment
connection.
in
Think about it
connection.
all. You go into, going into different schools. It's such a, I love what, the thing I love about my job the most is the fact that we get to go into different schools all the time, right? And just
Hmm.
enter into these buildings and get to know these communities.
Yeah.
And you see the places that have really, over time, invested in the people and
Yeah.
invested in the vibes of the building and invested in the way we feel here, right? Because they
Yeah.
know that this is a school building full of children,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Kids,
Let's
children,
come full circle. Kids that we need to love. Okay.
kids that we need to love, right? Kids that we need to love. I love
Yeah.
that. That feels like a perfect place to end. Vivian, thank
Yay.
you for coming on and being me
Oh,
today.
thank you for inviting me.